Medicine has made some pretty big leaps forward in the last century, but one disease that still outwits even the best medical minds is the common cold. Part of the problem is that it's caused by a suite of pathogens, not just one, and those pathogens happen to be viruses that mutate fast and hide inside their host cells. That said, we might be closer to getting rid of it than you would think, and knocking out a slew of other viral diseases at the same time. One of the reasons the common cold is so difficult to attack is that it's not a single target. The main culprits behind the common cold are rhinovirus, but there are hundreds of variants of them, and they aren't the only viruses to blame. All that diversity has kept us from making any kind of cold vaccine or targeted drug. It's also why our best chance to defeat the common cold once and for all is to develop a broad-spectrum antiviral, a medication that can wipe out many different viruses at once. Since we've already done that with antibiotics, you might think it would be easy to apply the same strategy to viruses. Most broad-spectrum antibiotics work by inhibiting key proteins the bacteria need to reproduce or make their protective cell walls. These are usually things that are structurally unique to bacteria, as opposed to multicelled organisms like us, so for the most part the drugs don't harm human cells. Viruses hijack their host cells to reproduce, using our cells' machinery for their own ends. So fighting these viral invaders while leaving our cells intact is a lot trickier. Not that we haven't tried. The first attempts at a universal antiviral tried boosting our body's natural immune system. When our cells detect a virus, they start making interferons, chemical messengers that signal the virus's presence to the rest of the body. So some of the first antivirals either were interferons themselves or boosted their effectiveness. And these drugs can work pretty well if taken before the virus gets out of control. One kind of interferon, interferon A, is still routinely used to treat hepatitis B and C, for example, but these drugs tend to come with a mess of side effects that happen when you somewhat indiscriminately ramp up your immune system. But what most antiviral researchers really want to find is something that targets viruses more directly. Kinda like the antivirals used against HIV. These medications take advantage of the way HIV inserts its genes into a person's DNA by targeting the viral proteins that allow it to do that. But the meds are designed to inhibit things specific to HIV so they don't work against other viruses. And finding a single Achilles heel common to many different viruses has proven difficult. Still, back in 2011, a team from MIT may have found one. They developed a protein that detects double-stranded RNA, a type of genetic code that is made by a lot of the most common viruses while they're replicating. These molecules aren't completely unique to viruses, but the ones made by viruses are much longer than the ones that happen naturally in human cells. In fact, their presence is one of the ways our own immune system figures out that you're infected. So the researchers took a protein that can detect these molecules, and they attached it to another protein which triggers cell suicide when more than one of the drug molecules binds to the same chunk of double-stranded RNA. And in a 2011 PLOS ONE study, they showed that this combined construct works against more than a dozen different viruses without harming several types of human cells. Killing infected cells might sound extreme, but the viruses are gonna kill your cell anyway when they've made enough copies, so the drug simply speeds things up and limits the number of viruses made. Unfortunately, the project has been in a constant battle for funding, so they haven't gotten far enough along in their research for human trials. Luckily, there are other promising antivirals in the works. A team of researchers in San Francisco is developing drugs that stop viruses from making the protein shells, or capsids, that they need to move about within and between hosts. Traditional studies have looked at capsid formation as a thing that just sort of happens on its own, but these developers tested the idea that the host cell unwittingly helps the virus with construction. And they found what appear to be traitorous proteins scientists had no clue were aiding the viruses, any of which could be a target for a broad-spectrum antiviral. Using this framework, the team has found inhibitors that work in animals against rabies, influenza, and Ebola viruses. But they still have a lot of testing to do before anything would be ready for human trials. And there's another broad-spectrum antiviral hoping to beat them there. This one takes advantage of natural hiccups in viral replication, because just like us, viruses aren't perfect. Sometimes during the gene copying process, they end up deleting big chunks of their own genes. These defective viruses are unable to make some really important proteins, so they can't infect healthy cells, but they can still create copies of themselves. And those copies, though harmless to your cells, get in the way of other viruses. So scientists have taken to calling them defective interfering viruses. viruses. Researchers are hoping to capitalize on these helpful defects by creating clones or synthetic versions. And so far, they've successfully treated multiple strains of influenza in mice with this approach. Of course, mice aren't people, so like other universal antivirals in development, there's a lot more work to be done. Still, the fact that there are so many potential broad-spectrum antivirals already in development is a really good sign. While scientists have yet to come up with the silver bullet, we live in exciting times. And it might not be too long before we can say to like the young whippersnappers out there, when I was your age, I got a cold. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow. If you liked learning about the latest cold-fighting advances, you might like our episode on how cold medicines actually treat those awful symptoms.